I'm Jade Pruett, and this is SEO in 2025 Additional Insights.
Jade, what's your additional insight for SEO in 2025?
Okay, I think that in 2025, we need to move back towards more original content. I think we went through this phase where we were playing around with AI and trying to come up with easy, quick ways to create content. But really, what is moving the needle is highly authoritative content that includes stories, expertise you can't find anywhere else on the internet, and actual insights from the experts, essentially.
So, what does that look like roughly statistically in terms of comparing content that's original, expert driven against perhaps content that's been primarily generated using AI? Are you able to provide any stats in terms of it's more likely to bring in X amount of organic traffic or retain users or something like that?
Of course, it depends, as does everything else in SEO. But I will say from personal experience, and I started off as a content writer in SEO over 10 years ago. So I was the original AI that was just pulling information from other blog posts to create something that was not particularly original in any way. And when AI started coming out and we saw EAT just really getting cranked up, I decided to start interviewing my clients, really getting their expertise so that I wasn't having to just pull from across the internet. And as an example, I had a client who was a cosmetic surgeon. I sat down with her for an hour and asked her all of these questions that were keyword informed. And she just gave me her answers. And they included anecdotal stories and all of this expert knowledge that really went over my head, but I was able to capture it in a transcript using Riverside and then use that to create a ton of blog content for her website, answering all of these questions that her clients are asking all the time. And within a few months, we saw her traffic, her organic traffic coming into her site, increase by over 400%. And that was 2 years ago. And we're still just seeing it creep up over time.
Superb. Okay. So a lot to unpack there. So interview your clients and have keyword driven content. So I like that phrase there as well. And it'd be great to get a sense of the volume of content that you produce, the cadence, the publishing frequency that you actually use for that as well there. So in terms of interviewing your clients, are you talking about just producing content that's text-based, or did you produce video content as well, audio content, or just focused on the transcript?
First and foremost, I focus on content that's written. But again, using Riverside, you can very easily create videos out of their interview and use it across the internet as kind of aligns with their business model and the rest of their marketing strategy. So there's a ton you can do.
Okay, great. Okay, so primarily text-based, but keyword-driven. So what does that mean?
For me, that means doing my keyword research up front to know which questions to ask. And then once the interview has happened, I rely more on context than actually shoving a bunch of keywords into the text. So if you're asking the right question to an expert, and maybe your headers are those questions throughout your blog content, then you don't really have to worry about integrating even more keywords in. So it actually makes your job a lot easier and it creates better content.
And where did you get those questions from?
That's a great question. Mostly from just doing keyword research within Ahrefs, figuring out what's already out there, and then making a big list of everything that we want to cover. So for her in particular, something that they offer is liposuction while you're awake, which sounded wild to me. And it sounds wild to a lot of other people. When you Google that, I think my client probably shows up now. But originally, it was a lot of questions in Reddit, people Googling a lot of things. So I was seeing things in Ahrefs coming up. And then we can just compile all those together and ask those questions to the expert.
So do you look at keyword volume as well? Or is it all about just questions that are relevant to the business?
I definitely look at keyword volume. We obviously want to go for the keywords that are getting searched the most, but that's just kind of a good place to start. And from there, I think like awake liposuction, for lack of a better example, didn't really have a very large amount of search volume in Ahrefs, but it was still worth covering because it's exactly what she offers, and people have a lot of questions around it.
And what about whereabouts questions fit into the buyer journey? Do you look at that, or is it all about relevance again?
It all kind of goes together. And another big part of this is asking the expert what questions their clients are asking them all the time. And sometimes things come up that you're not really seeing in an SEO tool or anywhere else online, but people are wondering it because that person's getting asked it all of the time. And so even if it doesn't serve SEO, it's serving the client once they get to the website. But of course, understanding the buyer journey, understanding what their concerns are at different points in that process is all really helpful.
So you can obviously generate a transcript relatively easily nowadays. How much tweaking, though, do you make to that transcript? Because people don't necessarily write the same way that they speak. So would you do a lot of editing to the interview that you conduct?
Typically, yes, a lot of organizing, putting the stories and kind of anecdotes where it makes sense. You want to have it structured like a blog, of course. And especially if you're dealing with a highly technical person, the way that they are going to tell you what they do is not going to translate to a kind of a clean blog post. So a lot of editing is done, but I do try to make it sound as much like the expert as I can.
And do you augment the content that you create with original imagery, maybe other images, other videos perhaps as well, and perhaps elements like tables?
Yes. And again, it depends. So if the client has a giant collection of branded images, we can work those in. If they have other assets that they want to link in, if charts are appropriate or graphs, things like that, all the way down to sometimes we just have to use stock photos. It really depends.
And when you go about deciding what content to create, do you also do competitor research? Do you search the keyword phrases for what content already exists and perhaps try to produce something better, more comprehensive than exists already? Or do you simply just look at the question, interview your client, and produce something original without too much care of what already exists?
Yes, knowing what is out there currently is a huge part of this, and that all kind of gets lumped in with the keyword research phase. So typically, I would start just Googling something around their niche, kind of what the primary topic of the content we want to create is. See what's already out there, see how it's structured. I did another one of these for someone who's in LinkedIn profile management, and I found these massive, massive articles that were covering like way too much information almost. And clearly were just written for length, but we obviously want to keep that in mind as we're creating things that are actually better for a user to actually read.
It can be tempting to go overboard when creating a page of content and create too much in there, and I guess answer questions that aren't so relevant. And I guess as a result of doing that, reduce the perceived relevance of the page in a search engine's mind, if they have a mind.
Right, right. And also just create a not great user experience at the same time. And I'm currently reading SEO in 2025, and I loved the beginning where they said that this is kind of like the Goldilocks era of SEO. Like it's not all about just writing the longest piece of content for a robot or just writing for the user. You have to be just right. And this is all kind of a part of that. Like provide the best information in the best way. But we also want to keep keywords in mind and make it show up because that's a part of the user experience as well as finding the blog.
So for this expert-driven content, what's the best way to go about finding experts? I mean, ideally, are we looking at internal experts? Does it matter? Can we have other external experts? And how do we go about determining their authority within an industry?
That's a great question. A lot of my clients who I serve are the experts in their field, but sometimes we have to look outside for an expert. I was recently working for a SaaS product in like the finance area where the founders are highly technical, but they're not financial advisors. And so I ended up just asking the clients, who is your favorite financial advisor to get advice from? And we used them as the expert. Sometimes it's, getting on LinkedIn and trying to find the best source of information. But obviously finding someone who really knows what they're talking about is a big part of this and is willing to share all of their knowledge.
And how do you mark up, if at all you do that, your web page to show to search engines who you're talking to and harness their expertise?
I was actually seeing something on, I believe, on Neil Patel's website yesterday about this, but creating a profile to link to on the website is big. But also, I like to just put a profile of the expert at the bottom of each blog. I feel like that's a better user experience for the person reading it, so they're not having to click around and try to figure out who this person is. But I know from an SEO perspective, having that separate page where we can kind of create a hub of all of this person's knowledge is very helpful as well.
Interesting. So if it's a person that you interview just once and it's perhaps just a single page on your website that they're featured on, would you still have a person profile associated with that article?
Again, it depends. It depends on the website, how it's structured. Is this like a massive blog where there's tons of different experts and it's kind of appropriate to do that? Sometimes the best thing to do is just do the profile at the bottom and link back to their site, and that's kind of enough.
Okay, but profile at the bottom, absolutely key.
hmm
And you mentioned incorporating real stories and insights as part of the conversation that you have. And you also mentioned the fact that Google prefers that. I mean, how do you know that Google prefers that? And also, how do you talk to your guest in a manner that encourages them to share real stories and insights?
These are good questions. I know that users prefer that, which means that Google would prefer that just from the perspective of people love stories. If I'm, interviewing a Pilates instructor, which happened recently for her website, and she's telling me stories about real people's experiences with Pilates as a part of writing a, benefits of Pilates webpage, that's obviously going to make all of the points she's making kind of drive home better and kind of connect with the user even more. And it's not hard to get stories out of people. Sometimes you have to directly ask, but as you and I are talking, I keep kind of pulling in anecdotes from my own clients and how this has actually worked for me, which is something you just don't get if you're just sitting down and you're like, I'm going to write a blog about something that I'm not particularly an expert in, but I'm just going to pull information from across the internet. Or, you ask AI to just write up something for you. They're not going to pull in their own personal anecdotes and things like that.
Do you just publish a new piece of content, like the kind of content that we've been talking about here, or do you have some kind of mini promotional strategy, such as perhaps using elements from the piece on social media as soon as it's been published, and maybe perhaps email as well, to encourage as many people as possible to view it straight away?
Yes. So one of my favorite ways to build these things out is to create an ultimate guide, like a big pillar piece of content that links to everything else. And sometimes we roll these things out over a few months. My favorite thing to do is just release like all 12 blogs at once. So we have a big ultimate guide, and then it links off to everything else that we've created together. And then really encouraging the client to share it on their LinkedIn, put it in a email campaign, things like that. When we do these in Riverside and we get the really good video content, I also like to create little clips to kind of share with the overall content. So you can actually see the experts sharing their knowledge on these things. And those are excellent for LinkedIn and other social platforms.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so that's like a mini launch. So essentially you'll create a dozen different pieces of content, a dozen different blog posts. You'll link them all together. You'll have some kind of index perhaps on the first article, or perhaps them all, I guess, to link them all together. And then you may incorporate different experts as part of that series and let them all know at the same time, and letting them know assist you with your promotional strategy and driving as many people to it to begin with as possible.
Exactly. Yes.
And where does this all fit into an overarching content strategy? Do you sit down at the beginning of each year and determine what you're going to do?
No, that would be great. That would be a good thing to do if I was a little bit more organized. Typically, when I have retainer clients, we have a certain amount of these that we have discussed creating at the beginning of our time together. So if they offer 3 primary services, it's like, hey, let's create a guide to each of these particular services. Sometimes I have e-commerce clients where it gets a little bit more interesting. We will do a deep dive on who their ideal client is and what type of information they're searching for, and typically go out, find the experts that we want to create this content with, and go from there. But I wish it was as organized as January 1st, I'm going to create a giant spreadsheet. But sometimes it's a bit more reactive than that.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2025?
I would suggest not spending too much time on your keyword research. Find your big keywords, but don't worry about dozens of supplementary keywords. Find your big one and then create content that really serves that keyword and serves the user, and the other supplementary ones will just make their way in there.
And the main keyword that you're talking about there, should that be focused on your homepage?
Yes.
Jade Pruett is founder of Hello SEO, and you can find her over at helloseo.com. Jade, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2025.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain, and you've been listening to SEO in 2025 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original podcast, video series, and book. Find out more at SEOin2025.com.